Hello everyone, I'm pleased to be your moderator. I hope you all enjoyed the presentation this morning. For those of you just joining us, welcome. Our objective today is that whatever your role in this industry, you will come away with something, a new idea, a fresh perspective, and new strategies that you can apply to be more successful in your business or service. So here is the format to give you an idea of what to expect. I will kick off the conversations, asking questions that draw out some of the trends we should be thinking about. And then, the second half of the time today, we will open up to the floor to write specific questions that you have been thinking. Sounds good? Okay, let's welcome our panelists. Okay, today, it is great that we have market analysts, the researcher, and also the caregivers together. I will emphasize we are together. First of all, maybe we can have an idea of how we could see the three parties collaborate to enhance aging in place. How every one of you visualize that could be happened in the next 5 years. Maybe Laurie's?
Well, I think one of the important things to think about is when I talk about technology, there's no technology that exists in a vacuum. Almost all of it emerges from research that has gone on to develop a core capability, and then some entrepreneur comes along and seizes that capability and turns it into a product. In fact, those are possibly the most successful technologies, the ones that were thought about for a while, tested on people. And so I believe better communication and sharing of information across research and caregiver populations would go a long way to helping us produce. What we really want is we want better products that are more widely used and effective in helping people age successfully, and that caregivers can provide the best care. So how do we get there? We have to start by better collaboration.
Ron, are you satisfied with that?
I'm very satisfied with what Laurie said. And it's, again, I believe here in Canada, we are already doing this. When I gave the examples of Age Well and Baycrest, or the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, it's a question of who's at the table. Okay? So from my side as a caregiver, okay, you have to also know that we're not the same caregivers. Okay? Just as Jeffrey was saying, that my situation will be different from another caregiver that might look the same. Okay? But you need us at the table. You need us at the table sooner than later. Okay? And one word that I love to use, okay, and Laurie was hinting to it just now, for me, it's the impact. Okay? The impact of this technology and these solutions. Okay? That for me, it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay? We don't need it all perfect. I believe in something called the 80-20 rule, and I apply that to caregiving and also innovation. So that's called Pareto's principle. But we don't need it perfect, okay? But you do need us at the table, okay, coming from the caregiver and the older adult. And you got to kind of find the ones that will make sense for what you're working on. So
Ron,
I'm going to agree with whatever they say today anyway, so you don't have to ask me that question. I'm already agree with them all the time.
Right. Practice makes perfect.
Yes.
I think, Jeff, maybe you can, add on to our conversations, because I think perfect impact definitely is your, it's something that you really focused on.
So I think I agree that we need, it's a village. We need all the input. I would say though that the input of the community, the people who actually are going to use the technology is, I think, more and more fundamentally part of the research enterprise. Certainly in patient healthcare related research, you can't do the research without patients and their families. So I think that that's somewhat fundamental. I do think there is an interesting distinction, though, in my experience, in technology being applied more widely. And I would say specifically when it is in the healthcare sphere. And so consumer technology, the business model, I'm going to overstate this and I don't mean to offend anybody, but it's basically how many widgets can I sell in a quarter? And to overstate it, it doesn't actually even matter whether it works. If I can just move X millions of widgets and then get to the next quarter and introduce a more attractive model, I can keep going. So I'm overstating that, but the principle I'm trying to get at is that for the aging constituents, for the population, these things have to work, and it's not simply a mass market. And I think that the individualization and working with industry and developers and I see this more and more, I think they actually are paying attention. Actually, I think, Laura, you've written about this quite effectively, that that there needs to be a little more input into the business sense about how these technologies can be better incorporated into aging life.
I think aging in place, in every country is a challenge. But to us, I always remember one sentence is talking about if there is a global challenge, there must be a global solution. So I think individually, no matter what your profession is, definitely we can work together. So recently, there's another question for you, all of you, is talking about the COVID-19. During the COVID, we noticed that more and more care professions start to use the technology to provide some telepractice. In Hong Kong, we would try to use the word telepractice. In your opinion, what is the biggest challenge for the users, for Ron, maybe for the service provider, that Nori, maybe, when you do the search and then do the analysis, you have, come across so many challenges and to adopt the new technologies. I just would like to know, how we can move on together to find out the global solutions to this pain point. Let's start where the client is. Ron, would you like to start off first?
Sure, thank you there. So for me, I would like to say, Grace, is that from the user side, one of the big challenges and gaps is trusting the technology, okay? Looking at it as an investment. So I talked about that earlier, that will this make my life better, okay? And part of that, sometimes it's not easy to understand what that technology is. And I believe most technologies you need to experience, okay? You need to touch it. You need to try it out, okay? And without that, you're just kind of guessing, will this add value in my life? So that process of touching it, feeling it, what I'm trying to suggest to many innovators and anyone that's selling products is to give them the opportunity, have better return policies, okay? Or the freebies, give that a try, okay? That's really where you're going to get the true test. If someone returns it, okay, then you're going to know why they're going to return it, okay? Or if they keep it, then it's going well, hopefully, okay? So it is something that I believe one of the gaps is we need to make it easier for the end user, okay, to actually try it out, okay? Give them 2 weeks, a month. So that's my suggestion.
You mentioned trial. I think, Jeff, you can experience that, in the past, we would try something, but we cannot get, the whole picture of it. But definitely telepractice, we can get the whole picture and we can also get the whole right picture, the clean data. What do you think about, these challenge, collecting data?
Well, collecting data is a challenge on a number of levels. It's I think one of the interesting challenges from the technology point of view is, and very relevant to COVID, is that the data is remotely being acquired, and so unless you're doing a direct telemedicine or televideo kind of interaction, you may not even know for sure whose data you're actually looking at. And so there's this kind of validation of reality in a way that I think is actually, I know in the pharmaceutical world where there's been a tremendous push now to complete clinical trials remotely, but the issue comes up as to, is the data we're seeing actually reflecting what the person's actually doing? And I don't mean people are, fake, they're not putting a wearable on their dog and having the dog walk around, but it's more that a person might, for example, be slowing down or sleeping poorly, that you're monitoring very well with a device, but they're not sleeping as well because they sprain their ankle, and it has nothing to do with the quote disease you think you're monitoring at the time. So it's this kind of not necessarily verifiable data that has to be always kind of thought about. So that's one very important area. There's a lot of other issues, related to security and privacy, and there's an interesting. You talked in your original question about international collaboration. Sharing data internationally is still not a turnkey process. We have collaborators using the system that I described in France, and so there the GDPR is a special policy that we have to go through. We have collaborators in Canada, and Canada doesn't like to send healthcare data to U.S. researchers without special hoops you need to jump through. The same thing in Australia and other places. So there are those challenges. I think, though, optimistically that they are being worked out, and that's a good thing. And the more we, it does make it more possible that the data can be moved around so easily, and we have to keep working on it.
Yeah. Nori, I must tell you that I'm your big fans. I always watch your website. Did anyone tell you that, as a market analyst, actually is a facilitator? Just now we say global solution, global pain point, global challenge. As a facilitator, market, analyst, how can you facilitate us, to embrace, this new trend?
Embrace the trend of global interaction and collaboration,
yes.
Or embrace a technology trend?
Yes.
Which? Both.
Technology trend, the telepractice trend.
Telepractice trend. Well, the telepractice trend actually has a number of barriers to it that we have to do a better job at overcoming. In the U.S., there's a particular gap in the connectivity and training associated with an end user, for example, like an older adult who is not comfortable with a computer or a smartphone. How can you have a tele-interaction with them? And during the pandemic, many attempts were made to do that by simple phone calls. And the U.S. government actually reimbursed doctors for doing those simple phone calls because there wasn't a better way to have an interaction with a person who can't go out and no one can come in. So to me, we have a technology gap, and if we didn't have a connectivity gap, if we didn't have a lack of internet connectivity, we would still have an issue around training and the communication about what a technology is. We like in the technology industry, to use a lot of what we call buzzwords. We can actually confuse and baffle everybody about the benefits of a particular technology, which if it was simply described in a simpler fashion, it might be useful. But I have to say that in general, most technology inventors create something that has multiple steps to start it up. and I don't even have to name a particular one. It's true of all of them. If you sit down with any technology and you start to look at how to install it, how to get it to run, how to share data with somebody else, how to have them communicate with you, pretty soon you're down to 9 or 10 steps and you haven't really done anything. And so I think that's a big issue. Simplification of processes and technology processes in particular, and doing a better job of training.
Yeah. I think just now you're talking about, all these, I would say, the making of something big happened. Definitely we cannot do without the government. What about when we talk about, to promote the general technologies, for example, the possible roles of the government, or maybe the government policy, more specific, the government policy. Do you believe that it would be better for the government to stay away all this, or, come in together? Laurie?
Do you want to start with me, or start with me? Okay. So I think we want the government to be helpful. Like I just described an example of the government being helpful by reimbursing doctors for telehealth interactions that involve the telephone. That's when the government is helpful. The government can also be helpful of identifying what standard practices are and then defining those standards so they're useful to all of the constituent groups. That's another issue. And then the third thing that the government can be really useful on is evaluating prices of connectivity and products and understanding what the capability is of people and physicians and other practitioners to be able to afford those products. Because I not to be cynical about inventors, but sometimes that isn't well thought through at the point of invention.
How about Ron?
Okay, so I'm going to come from the perspective of the caregiver. With the government, I look at the government providing credit to the caregiver, credits, forms of reimbursement, so that the caregiver can choose themselves, what technology that is best for them. Okay, so personally, I won't want the government to tell me, here are your only choices, when I know that there might be better choices over here. Okay, support me in getting the best tool, that I think is best. Okay, so that's how I would look at the government supporting caregivers and families.
In general, I think government support the caregivers as a policy with the technology. That is, definitely we have to go on these directions. Jeff, how about you? How about your view?
I certainly agree with what Ron and Laurie have already said. As again, in practicing medicine, we did go through, overnight to actually reimbursing direct-to-home video appointments, which the private sector had actually, private insurance was already allowing, and some states had already said that for private insurance, you had to reimburse for a video visit at the same rate as an office visit. But it was our national Medicare, which covers our aging population, that wasn't yet ready to do that until recently. So it's an amazing change that we hope remains after the pandemic. But even within that system, so when that was rolled out, most health systems were very concerned about the privacy, the security of conducting these appointments online, and so you had to use certain vendors. And I remember in the first weeks, the interface was not perfect, like many of these interfaces. They can have problems. The menus are in different places. We now use multiple platforms, and it's like, where's the chat button? And so this was challenging. And I remember at one point the person I was speaking with just said, "Can I just FaceTime you?" and I'll probably lose my license, but I said, "Sure," because we just did the visit that way, and it was outside of the protected environment. Although honestly, I could do a follow-up appointment unreimbursed on a telephone at any time prior to that. So these kind of regulations and things like that, I think, need to be more thoughtfully considered, because they can create barriers. I just want to quickly say that on the research side, funding this area is extremely important. The relative funding for research in digital health is much smaller than most other areas of biotechnology. So if you look at areas like genomics and proteomics and imaging, the resources, at least in our federal budget, the NIH, the NSF, is much smaller for digital health. It's changing, but I think it's a great investment, an important investment. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but I do think it's something that we hope to see increasing in our country and worldwide.
Yeah, I think to me, government involvement definitely, for example, the data, the openness, the health data that we can get access to, not just only benefit to the patient, the caregivers, but definitely to the startups, or sometimes to the researcher. I think this is something that we can push for, and so that we can have a good depository of the data, and then we can do the analysis better. Well, we will go ahead and take some questions from the floor. So for the floor, please ask questions in a Q&A box if you want to join our discussions. Just now, Jeff, you talked about the data collection. These two words really come to my heart because sometimes we talk about the data collections, we talk about the data monitoring. Definitely, we are quite sensitive to react to the privacy issues. It seems to me that in the market analysis, there's not too many talk about on the privacy issues, but the applications of the products to protect the privacy, I'm not so sure. Maybe Nora, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Whether there's applications to protect privacy? I don't know that I can offer up too many applications specifically designed to protect privacy. I would say the reverse is the problem, which is we just mentioned applications like FaceTime, and you could even mention Zoom and other interaction applications maybe don't do enough to protect privacy, and hopefully that will change. I'm not sure you're aware, there's now something called Zoom for Healthcare, which hopefully is more private and secure than Zoom is. And that's also true of some of the other technologies, Microsoft Teams and Skype. They all have variants now acknowledging the fact that the interactions that they're supporting are between professionals who want to actually communicate private information with individuals. I mean, your healthcare and my healthcare, we want to keep that information as private as we can. And on open platforms like Facebook or whatever, FaceTime and all these other platforms out there, our information is open until we protect it. It's not the other way around, protect it until we open it. So I think that's a philosophy in technology design, and we want to see a little bit more thought given to it.
Okay. It sounds very reasonable and logical. Ron, do you have anything to add on it? Right.
On privacy, yes, so I could go a lot on that, but from the caregiver-patient side, when it comes to privacy, a word that Lori used earlier is trade-off, okay? So that trade-off piece, there's a risk, okay, with privacy. That's what we fear, what's going to happen with this data or with the information being shared. A doctor, like Dr. Jeffrey here, could be talking to me, but someone in my house is listening, which maybe I didn't realize that I don't want them to know, okay? So that could even be on my part. But in the end, when you see, for example, my situation of cameras in the house, okay? I was doing that 8 years ago. And for me, it was that trade-off. If I didn't have that, okay, there was higher risk, higher safety concerns. My dad probably would have had to go somewhere else sooner than later. And for aging in place, okay, it's that trade-off. As I said, it's not perfect, okay? But does it give me a better return when we do the calculation, risking the risk of privacy versus the benefits of what I'm trying to solve for to age in place?
Okay.
That's how I look at privacy and the risk around that.
Okay, Jeff, do you have any take-home message that you want to share with us?
Well, I think when you talk about there's a trade-off or a consideration in terms of what is the data. So the data that's generated by a device or a sensor is so-called raw data. It's ones and zeros, if you will. The likelihood that somebody's going to be sitting outside your house trying to intercept those those data streams and do something,
Okay.
I would say have at it. We have enough trouble analyzing that data ourselves, and we're pretty good at that. I think it's as you go up the stream of data and it becomes actionable and valuable is where you look at where are those points that the data might be questionable or concerning. There are companies now that are, for example, looking at a financial transaction activity to protect individuals, and I think that's an example of a positive kind of reaction, or at least way of looking at this kind of data.
Okay, thank you for joining us today. That should wrap up our discussion for this morning, and thank you all of you. Thank you for the audience.